Hello, welcome to Rising Technologies. I'm Harish. This is part 10 of Core Java video tutorial. In this session, we are going to learn about what is constructor function, need of a constructor function, various types of constructor functions. It is very common for some part of an object to require some kind of initialization before that object can be used. Suppose you are working on hundreds of objects of class circle and the initial value of pi data member within that object should be set to 3.14. So in this case, if a normal member function is defined for initialization, we need to call that function for each and every object separately. Now let's see what I mean. I have this class, circle class. Within this class, I have these two private fields, radius and pi. There are two methods, one method that is responsible to calculate the area of circle and another method is to set the radius of that particular object. I have created two instances of this circle class within main method. I have invoked its setRadius method so that I can set the radius of respective instances, and then I have displayed the area of both the instances. Let's compile this and run this. Now look at the output. Output is shown as area of C1 is 0, area of C2 is 0, and that is definitely wrong. So area of C1 is not 0 because the radius is set to 8. So why this wrong answer is displayed by this program? Because currently for these two instances, this pi variable is not yet initialized. So the default initial value of this pi will be 0 and 0 multiplied with any value will result into 0. So I need to initialize this pi to 3.14, and for that I'm going to define a member function with the name init. And within this method I'm going to say pi is equivalent to 3.14. Now I have two instances and I want to initialize the internal state of these two objects for this pi variable. So I'm going to invoke this init method on both these instances, c1.init and c2.init. Now when I call this init method for each and every instance, the value of this pi variable will be set to 3.14. Now let's compile this and run this. Now look at this. Output of these two circle object, or the area of these two circle object, is shown correctly. So what is happening in this program? We have defined a normal member function for the initialization, and we are forced to call that function for each and every object. Now what if in some instances I forget to call this init method? So what will happen? That particular object C2 will be uninitialized and the area of that C2 will be definitely wrong. Now look at the output. Area of C1 is displayed correctly, but area of C2 is displayed as 0. So you can imagine, currently I have only two instances of the circle class. But imagine if I have hundreds of objects of the circle class. So calling init method for each and every object is definitely a tedious job. Also it is an error-prone practice because I might forget to call that function for certain objects. So instead of this manual initialization procedure, I want to make this initialization job automatic. For automatic initialization, what I can do? I can define a constructor function, and that constructor function will initialize the data member to 3.14. Then all I need to do is declare instances and the constructor function will initialize the object automatically. So what is a constructor function? A constructor is a special member function. It is special because it has the same name as its class in which it lies. So suppose I have this circle class and I want to define a constructor. So the name of that function will be same as its class name. So I'm going to say circle. Okay, so it has the same name as its class. The constructor function is automatically called whenever a new object of this class is created. That means whenever I'm going to create a new instance of this circle class, the first thing which happens is execution of this function because it is a constructor function. Even it is syntactically similar to a method, the constructor looks like a little strange because they have no return type, not even void. So what we need to do? This method should be changed something like this. So constructor function do not contain any return type, even not void. We can decorate this method, this constructor method as public. So why there is no return type? Because the implicit return value of a class constructor is the class type of object itself. That means when I say new circle, I am actually invoking this constructor function. This constructor is initializing my object and that object will be returned by that statement new circle. And that object will be initialized to this reference variable C1 and another object will be assigned to C2. So this is the reason constructor function do not have any return type. And the responsibility of a constructor function is to initialize an object immediately upon creation. That means the moment this statement completes, this object, an object of this class will be created and this constructor will initialize the pi to 3.14. The moment I declare one more instance of this separate class, again this constructor will be called and the pi of another instance will be set to 3.14. That means this function is guaranteed to call upon declaration of each and every instance of this separate class. And as this constructor function executes the moment you declare an instance, it is guaranteed that this pi variable will have its initial value. So in previous attempt, we have created an init method. So initialization of that object was manual. We need to call that method manually. But in this example, we do not really need to call this function. This function gets automatically called whenever you create a new instance of the server class. Now with all these changes, let's compile this program and let's run this program. Now look at the output. Output is perfectly displayed by this program. So this is the constructor function. Now there are three types of constructor. The first constructor that is called as default constructor. It is also called as default parameterless constructor. So I have created a constructor that do not have any argument. That's why it is called as default or non-argument or parameterless constructor. In our last example, we have learned about method overloading. So constructor is also one kind of method and we can also overload a constructor within a class. So currently, to set the radius of each and every object, I have invoked this setRadius method. But I want to provide one more constructor within this class. And this constructor will take a parameter and that parameter will be radius. So the first job of this constructor is to set this pi to 3.14 and the next job is to initialize this radius with the value sent as a parameter within this parameter. Okay, so now I have two constructors within this circle class. Suppose I don't want to invoke this setRadius method also. So what I can do, while creating an instance, if I say new circle and I do not provide any argument, Java compiler is going to invoke this particular constructor for this instance. Now if I say circle C2 equal to new circle and I specify some kind of parameter over here, so in this case Java is going to invoke the constructor that has a parameter. So for the second object I am creating over here, this constructor will be called and this value, that is 8, I am passing from this call, will be set as a parameter into this variable and the value of this variable will be initialized to radius. Now if I compile and run this, now look at the output of C2. C2 has shown its area as 200.96. Suppose I want to specify some argument while creating the first instance as well. So in this case I am passing one argument and compiler is going to invoke the second constructor. Now let's compile and run. And these are the respective areas of both the instances. So we have just learned about what default constructor is and what parameterized constructor is. Now let's have a look at what copy constructor is. Suppose I want to make a copy of this particular instance. So if I declare circle C3 is equivalent to C1, does it will create one copy of this object? No. This line is going to declare one more reference variable C3 and the reference C1 will be copied into this reference. So currently I have 2 objects and 3 references, but I want one more object, and that object should copy the data from this instance. So I can provide a constructor within this class, and this constructor is going to receive an object of circle class. So I'm going to say circle parameter. So pi will be set to 3.14, but the radius will be set to the radius that is sent as a parameter in this object. So I'm going to say p dot radius. So currently I have 3 different kinds of constructor within this class. One is default argumentless constructor, another constructor that takes a number as a parameter and it initializes your object. One more constructor that takes a circle object as a parameter and it copies the internal state of this object into newly created object. That means I want to create one more instance and I want to copy all data from this instance. So I'm going to say new circle, and what I'm going to pass as a parameter, the circle object itself. So I'm passing this C1 as a parameter to the constructor of C3. So this constructor will be called and the P is going to receive the instance referred by the C1, and this C3 is going to have the same data that is set within the C1. Let's try to print area of the C3. And look at the output. Area of C1 is also 153, area of C3 is also 153. And why is that? Because we have created this instance C3 by copying data from this object C1. So this type of constructor is called as copy constructor. Now we have just learned that constructor function is responsible for creation of an object. But in our previous examples, we have not defined any constructor in the class. So how come those objects were created? The answer is, if no constructor is defined in the class, in such situation, Java compiler implicitly provides a constructor which is called as default constructor. Now look at this very simple class. I have created a class sample which contains some variables, some method, but I have not provided any constructor within this class. So what happens when we compile this class? After compilation, this class will become something like this. Look at this constructor. We haven't provided this constructor in our source code, but after compilation, Java compiler is going to add this constructor for us. So you can clearly see compiler has implicitly added a constructor to this class, which has empty body again, because compiler is not supposed to put any logic over here. But remember, compiler is going to add this default parameterless constructor only when we do not provide any constructor within our class. Now look at this another class. Again, I have created this simple class which contains some data members and some methods. Along with this data member and some method, I have provided a constructor that takes some parameter. So if I compile this program, after compilation this class will remain as it is. Compiler is not going to provide a default parameterless constructor. So default parameterless constructor will be provided by the compiler only when we do not provide any constructor in our source class. Thanks for watching. For more details, visit our official site at www.risingtechnologies.in. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel.